Fresh from the showroom here at Swiss Watch Expo, SwissWatchExpo.com. This morning, Creed, what are we talking about?
The Tag Heuer Monaco and the rich racing tradition and history of these watches.
I love the Tag Heuer Monaco. For me, I mean, you might not know much about the history of this watch. There was a consortium of 3 different Swiss watch companies that got together and in secret developed the world's first automatic winding mechanical chronograph watch. They launched it March 3rd, 1969 to the shock of the rest of the watch world. And the Heuer Monaco, at the time as it was called, was one of the very first ones to use that movement.
Absolutely, and one of the things we've talked about in the past is why Breitling and Tag Heuer go together. It's because Breitling and the way that they made their chronograph movements with the dual button pushers was something that Tag absolutely needed because they had moved from the pocket watch now to the wristwatch. So that was a big combination between Breitling and Tag Heuer.
So the 3 companies were Breitling, Heuer, and Buren, which I never hear anything about anymore. I guess they don't exist maybe in the market?
Don't ask me, I haven't heard about them as long as you have either. Now, interestingly, I have seen one of their watches at a place where I formerly worked, which was very interesting. Yeah, it was hard to get them worked on, though, by the way. So the reason that we're talking about the Monaco today is because I have a strong appeal for the racing, rich racing history of all things Tag. So Tag began with what was called the micrograph in the early days, which was kind of the world's first timing device used within the race car scene. Starting in the 19-teens all the way up through the 1930s when we got the Altavia.
Now these were all Heuer watches because
Heuer watches.
Tag actually merged with them in the 80s, if I remember right. Is that right?
In the 1980s, once there was a shift in ownership for Heuer. The Heuer family had kind of moved along to the side. Some changes happened within. So Techniques Avant-Garde was the Tag moniker that popped up after Heuer. And as I understand it from those who work with Tag, this was a name that they developed because Heuer was something that was difficult to pronounce in so many different languages.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it was hard to recognize. Now, I find that a little bit odd because it had been around for so long, but that's what they stand by. And Techniques Avant-Garde is a lift up for all of the exorbitant technologies that go into their chronographs because they are the vanguard of the watch, the technical watch industry.
That's interesting. Now this watch really jumps out at me. I love this blue dial Monaco. This is the one, if you ever watched Breaking Bad, this is the one that Walter White wore on the watch once he had made a lot of blue meth. This is the one that he bought. And I've actually had people come in and say, I need the Walter White watch. So maybe there's a new nickname coming, as we've seen a lot of nicknames in the Rolex world.
Well, so actually the blue was the very first color that was used from 1969. Actually, blue and gray were the 2 colors that were available. Steve McQueen wore the original blue color in the Le Mans movie. And that was, of course, in 1971. And the gray color, which is, I've actually chosen the Gulf edition, which is the newest version of their sponsorship team. It does have the original gray combined with the orange. Now, these are limited edition models, so you can only find them in certain areas. We happen to have this one.
That Gulf livery is just so good looking. It reminds me of the Ford GT team in the 1960s that beat Ferrari at their own game. And it's just got a lot of interesting racing heritage behind it.
Absolutely, and they come in a lot of different, what I call flavors. So you have the original black as well. Now, what people don't realize is that there were 200 models produced back in the 1970s. Wow. I believe it was in 1974 they had a PVD model. And if you can find one of those PVD models, it's worth an absolute fortune. But there's only 200 that exist in the world according to Tag. Yeah, so one of the other things that changed over the years too were the pushers. The pushers used to be a round series, and now they're sort of a rectangular series. The other thing that people don't realize is, and this is a great one because we actually have it here, this is an acrylic crystal on this watch. Now, they've moved to sapphire crystals for today's technologies, but the original was, in fact, the acrylic crystal. Now, what was important about this watch, more than anything, given the fact that it was a chronograph, no other watch had been made in rectangular form and was water resistant with this kind of crystal in it. This was actually the world's first water-resistant rectangular crystal ever produced.
And I see this one is a smaller scale, and it doesn't have the exhibition case back that the more current one with the sapphire crystal and the exhibition back has.
There's an interesting point because a lot of people don't realize that the original models were a little bit different shaped in the case.
Oh, really?
The new ones have a more rectangular shape. The old ones, that was a more square shape. The older ones were more of a rectangular shape.
I didn't know
It's
that.
very minor, but it is there. You do have to have them sort of side by side to see that. It's an interesting look. One of the other things about the Monaco, the differences in the movements. They did have a manual wind, and they did have an ETA movement. Now, what's interesting is the ETA movement, the crown was on the left side of the watch. The Salida movement is on the right side of the watch. So, in the original forms, they were made with the crown on the right side of the watch, which would mean it would be on this side.
Like a left-handed watch.
That's right.
But the chrono pushers were still on the right?
That's correct.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, So the crown was on the left, the pushers are on the right.
Yeah.
If you're looking at the face of the watch.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So the Salida movement is sort of a more rare piece too, and a lot of people have a hard time finding them now. Tag makes them, they're just in limited quantities.
So it sounds like if someone just wanted to focus on collecting within this one series, they could make a lifetime of collecting just from all the 200 models made in the 70s.
Absolutely. And just to be sort of a side note, the bracelet is something that was hyper rare too. So a lot of folks look for the bracelet, but today's watches don't have that bracelet. They only have the straps.
Okay.
Now let's move on for just a second because the rich racing history of the Monaco comes from the original Altavia.
Okay.
Which was the original pocket watch and then subsequently was the chronograph worn on the wrist. Now, when Steve McQueen was playing the part in the movie, the original race car driver for the fellow he was playing was an Altavia. It was Steve McQueen that made the choice to wear the newest update of this Monaco. The Monaco, of course, named after the Monaco race, the Formula One series. And if you are a huge Formula One fan, and there are so many that I am surprised in the world that know who Ayrton Senna is, the Ayrton Senna watch, we have one. It's in PVD black as well, as the original kind of throwback to the Altavia brand, although this is a Carrera. So the Carrera sort of has that Altavia look, the throwback look, but it's in fact a Carrera. And also one of the other things about this watch is that it does have the rubber tread like the race car tread.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, and then it's got the Ayrton Senna S branding on the back.
Cool.
So Tag Heuer is an exclusive provider of Ayrton Senna watches, and they go like crazy. This is the only one that we have currently that I'm aware of.
Wow.
Yeah. One of the other watches that I'm actually wearing, which is a favorite, it's also a limited edition piece. It's the open skeleton with the Arabic numeral stopwatch sort of style numbers around the dial of the watch. It is a deployant clasp. It does have the crystal case back so that you can see the Tag Heuer 01 internal movement. This is a Tag Heuer 100% designed and engineered movement. So that's different from all the other pieces.
That's interesting. I love the skeleton dials where you can, because we're used to seeing a lot of exhibition case backs where you can see that side of the movement, but it's unusual to be able to see the top side of the movement. The skeleton dials give you a nice little window to be able to see all of that craftsmanship that you're appreciating about your watch.
Absolutely. And for people who like a more dressy watch, there are the diamond-studded ones available too, and I thought we'd bring that out because we actually do have one. This is sort of a unisex model. I've seen fellows wear these. This one has the grand date at the top as well, but I've also seen ladies wear them. It's a little bit bigger for most ladies to wear, but you know, ladies wear larger watches these days.
I could definitely see my wife wearing that.
Yeah. There's also smaller versions. There's quartz versions in addition to all of these too. So Monaco spans the gamut. If you want a Monaco, as you said earlier, it's like Halloween candy. You can have as much as you want.
Awesome.
And enjoy it.
All right, well, fresh from the showroom, Swiss Watch Expo.